First in time among the robber barons was Cornelius Vanderbilt.
Cornelius Vanderbilt is one of the interesting characters in railroad history, but more generally transportation history. He was involved in many different ventures, especially steamboats, river traffic, and ocean traffic by boat and ships, until the time of the Civil War. Then he suddenly became seriously interested in railroads. He was 60-some years old at the time. So usually railroading is a young man's business. And most of the entrepreneurs and builders are in their 20s and 30s. So Vanderbilt's very unusual in this case of starting in the railroads when he's in the 60s. But what he did was he realized that his main business was river boats up and down the Hudson River, and that railroads were the wave of the future. So he started buying up railroads and consolidating them and built the New York Central Railroad.
At that time, Vanderbilt was worth over $140 billion in today's dollars, and from then on turned to philanthropy, founding Vanderbilt University. Such was not the case with Jay Gould, who epitomized the worst of the railroad robber baron era. A man who used and manipulated the stock market to amass personal fortunes, often to the detriment of the railroad companies whose stocks he was playing with.
Gould was one of the more hated people in the country. Bernie Madoff looks like a saint compared to Mr. Gould.
Jay Gould was greedy in that era. He deliberately squeezed out a lot of railroad companies so that he could buy their stock or buy controlling interest at dime store prices, and then he would turn around and he'd build some of those up so that they'd gain, and then he could sell the stock and make a lot of money.
The railroad robber barons did business in an economic structure that allowed them, on one hand, to forge monumental fortunes like Vanderbilt's through smart financial risk and real asset management. In other words, actually building a railroad. The true entrepreneurs. And on the other hand, others, driven only by greed, amassed fortunes manipulating the stock market. J.J. Hill, James Jerome Hill, was the opposite of the greed-driven Jay Gould. He was a careful planner, and as a result, his famous Great Northern Railway became one of America's longest-lived railroad empires.
James J. Hill was a Canadian who moved down to build a base in Minneapolis. And he built a railroad system in the northern tier of states from Minneapolis, Minnesota, North Dakota, Montana, all the way to Seattle, Washington on the West Coast, Transcontinental Railroad, without government help. He was one of the few who managed to do it. He bought the land from the government. It was very cheap land because without a railroad, land is very little demand for empty land. But he moved in Scandinavian farmers. So the Hill Railroad system would have agents in Sweden and Norway, especially, and also Germany. Hill's agents are telling you that you come to Minnesota, you come to North Dakota, Montana, and for the cost of 10 acres of land here in Germany or Sweden, we'll give you 200 acres. We'll give you 20 times as much land and a railroad that will let you ship it in and out, and you just have to farm it. And in fact, we'll sell you the land on a on a 5-year deal, so you have no payments to make until, in fact, you actually start producing your wheat crop. It's usually wheat in those areas. And as soon as you produce that wheat, and then you could start paying back the loan. That's a very good deal. And hundreds of thousands of Scandinavians and Germans took up Hill. The other railroads copied it.
The West, too, had its share of robber barons. Robber barons like Colorado's General William Jackson Palmer and Montana Senator William Clark built smaller railroads, feeder lines that were resource-specific, transporting the agricultural wealth of the West's vast plains, the enormous fortune in gold and silver from its mountains, and the great wealth of the Pacific Northwest's forests to the nation. It was William Clark, a millionaire copper mine owner from Montana, who showed how railroads could literally build a town out of nothing and turn it into a thriving community. He turned an unknown Nevada town, Las Vegas, into one of America's premier urban centers.
Senator William Clark, who made his early fortune in Montana copper, eventually moved to Los Angeles, and he wanted to build a railroad connecting Los Angeles and Salt Lake City. Los Angeles already had a railroad going north to San Francisco and east to Phoenix, and it was to be the hypotenuse of the triangle. If we could move directly from Los Angeles to Salt Lake and on to Chicago, that would be a better way to move cargo. Also, he could also connect his mines in Montana more directly to the port at San Pedro. And so he came to Helen Stewart, who owned the Major Ranch, which is downtown Las Vegas today. He wanted to get her water rights and her land because he wanted to build a division town here. A division town is where you change crews, where you change locomotives, you can have repair shops, and you could ice the freights. They had to drop ice every few hundred miles on the produce coming from California to keep it fresh before refrigeration all the way to New York City. And so he needed her water and he needed the land, and so he paid her about over $70,000 for what is basically downtown Las Vegas for his little town and his rail yards and his repair shops and station. And they began building the town in 1905 as the railroad approached from the south. Clark basically launched the town on his San Pedro, Los Angeles, and Salt Lake Railroad.
William Jackson Palmer was a Civil War hero and a Medal of Honor winner. In 1870, he founded the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad and changed the course of railroading in the Western Mountains when he introduced narrow-gauge track for the rugged mountains rail lines.
In the state of Colorado and elsewhere throughout the United States, mountainous territory frequently presented the need for grades that were too steep or curves that were too sharp for the standard gauge. Consequently, notably in Colorado and Pennsylvania and many other locations, narrow gauge was used. That is, the distance between the inside of this common rail here and the inside of this rail is only 3 feet between the tracks.
Palmer's Denver and Rio Grande Railroad made him rich and powerful, and he remained one of Colorado's most beloved entrepreneurs until his death in 1909. With the robber barons rapidly building lines throughout the nation, soon railroad tracks saturated the country. So the robber barons turned to earning money from passenger fares and shipping rates. As a result, they plunged America into the era of the Railroad Wars. Wars with a surprising consequence.
Hi, I'm Bill Ambrose. If you like this video, subscribe so we can bring you more programming from our studio. Thank you for subscribing.